They convinced you that you were the problem, the flawed one, the broken one. You needed to be fixed, to be tamed, to be reshaped into something that fit their perfect little box. That's the story they like to tell themselves, isn't it? Because it's easier for them that way. They were so quick to say it. You were the problem, weren't you? Oh, how they loved saying it. They whispered it right in your ear, wrapping their arms around your neck, drawing you close, only to strangle you with their expectations. You need fixing, they'd insist, with voices as sweet as poison. But here's the truth, my friends. Those who claimed to have the answers, those who pointed fingers at you, barely had themselves together. Tell me, how many times did they call you too emotional? How often were you dramatic, overreacting? Yet when the tables turned, when things didn't go their way, who was throwing the tantrums? Who was lashing out, spiraling into anger and resentment? It wasn't you, my friend. It was them. The very people who labeled you as the problem became unhinged the moment they lost control over you. And there it is, the real issue. It was never about your flaws. It was their inability to control you, to mold you into something that served their ego. Oh, they hated it when you stopped playing along. How they despised it when you refused to be the villain in their story. When you finally realized you were never the problem, they began to unravel. They couldn't handle it, because without you to blame, all they had left was their own reflection. And let me tell you, they didn't like what they saw. You see, in the game of manipulation, there's a trick. The louder someone calls you the problem, the more they're hiding their own dysfunction. They'll say you're too emotional, too intense, too difficult to love. It's just their way of deflecting, burying their own flaws. Heaven forbid they look in the mirror and face the reality of their own mess. Instead, they shove it all onto you. They make you believe it's your fault. They spin their web, pulling you into a game where the rules keep changing. And you, dear player, are always wrong. You twisted yourself, didn't you? You bent over backward, thinking that if you could just be a little quieter, a little smaller, you'd finally be enough for them. But here's the truth. They never wanted you to be enough. They wanted you chasing an illusion, so you'd never question them. Because the moment you stopped playing their game, the moment you saw them for what they truly were, the cards came tumbling down. And oh, how they hate that. You weren't broken, no. You were too real, too honest, too unwilling to be their puppet. They thought they could keep you in the dark. But you were smarter than that. You saw through it all. They called you too much, too emotional, too dramatic, too hard to handle. But isn't it funny? The very ones who accuse you of being too much are the ones barely holding it together. They told you that you were the problem to cover up their own unraveling. You see, it's easier to make you feel like the broken one than to face the fact that they were falling apart all along. They needed you to believe you were the issue, because if you weren't, well, what would that say about them? The lengths people go to avoid their own reflection. They built a house of cards, expecting you to live in it, to believe in its stability. But you blinked, and it collapsed. And when it did, they exploded. Because the truth was too much for them. The truth that they were the ones emotionally immature, the ones who couldn't handle confrontation without turning it into a battlefield. The ones who, instead of owning their issues, projected them onto you. And here's the twist. After they've pushed you away, after they blamed you for everything, they come face to face with their own storm, one of their own making. My, oh my, does it rage. They said you were too dramatic. Look at them now, throwing tantrums because they can no longer control you. They said you were too emotional, yet here they are, breaking down, begging for the sympathy they never offered you. Oh, how the tables have turned. They never wanted to admit you were right, because if you were right, they were wrong, and that's something people like them can't stand. They'll twist the narrative, bend facts, rewrite history if they must, to keep themselves in the clear. But in those quiet moments when no one's watching, they know. Oh, they know. They know they pushed you away because you were too real, too raw. You weren't playing their game, and that terrified them. So they lashed out like a child who didn't get their way, unable to face their own inadequacies. And now, they're left with the wreckage of their own creation. And you've risen above it. You never needed fixing. You needed freedom. Freedom from their lies, their manipulation, their endless attempts to make you believe you were less than. They wanted you to change, but the truth is, they feared you staying exactly as you were. Because when you didn't change, you held up a mirror to their insecurities. And that's what truly scared them. Now they sit among the ruins of their own chaos. And who's left to blame? Certainly not you. No, my friends, you've moved on. You've escaped their web. But they're still caught in it, still spinning their lies, still trying to convince themselves it was all your fault. But the cracks are showing. The facade is crumbling, and soon they'll have to face the truth they've been running from all along. Because here's the truth they can't escape. You were never the problem. They were. Their inability to take responsibility, their need to control, their fear of being vulnerable. That's what destroyed them, not you. You were merely the scapegoat. But not anymore. You've woken up. You've seen through their game. And that's something they'll never forgive you for. But here's the twist, the one they'll never see coming. They've lost you. And in losing you, they've lost the very thing that kept their illusion alive. Without you to blame, they're left with only the cold, hard truth of their own emptiness. And that, my friends, is a fate far worse than they could ever imagine. They projected their chaos onto you. They made you feel like you needed fixing, like your heart, your mind, your soul was something they were so graciously willing to fix. If only you could be a little more like this, they'd say. If only you could change that. And so, you twisted yourself, sacrificing piece by piece in hopes of finally being enough. But no matter how much you bent, it was never enough, was it? Because it was never about you being broken. It was about them, their insecurities, their inability to confront their own reflection. They blamed you for their shortcomings, because it was easier than admitting they were falling apart. And while they told you over and over that you were the one who needed fixing, they were the ones igniting flames of chaos in their own lives. And here's the irony. They said you couldn't keep it together. They said you were unstable. But look at them now, unraveling faster than a thread from a cheap sweater. It's funny, isn't it? The louder they shouted about your flaws, the more they revealed their own. Like a magician too focused on the trick, they forgot the audience could see the strings. And trust me, the scales are tipping. Their storm is closing in, and they have no one to blame but themselves.